The moment Margaret Wilson slammed my 8 months pregnant sister Emma to the ground over wind chimes, she had no idea I would be the judge assigned to her assault trial. Her face, when she walked into my courtroom, that look of absolute horror, when she realized who I was, is something I'll treasure forever. But justice has a strange way of coming full circle. 1 year after Margaret's assault on my sister, we're facing something even worse, and this time, the courtroom won't save us. These entitled HOA tyrants never learn, but neither do they know who they're messing with when they target my family. For those who missed my previous video, my sister Emma moved to Sunshine Acres, where HOA President Margaret Wilson immediately targeted her with ridiculous violations. When Emma was 8 months pregnant, Margaret actually shoved her to the ground during an argument about wind chimes. By some cosmic coincidence, I was the judge initially assigned to Margaret's assault case before recusing myself. Margaret eventually pleaded guilty, received probation, and moved away in shame. The community elected kind-hearted Mrs. Gonzalez as the new HOA president, and everything seemed perfect. Until 3 months ago, when Veronica Chambers, Margaret's former right hand on the HOA board, returned from an extended sabbatical. Turns out, she'd been quietly buying up properties in Sunshine Acres through shell companies while everyone celebrated their newfound community harmony. Within weeks, she had acquired enough voting power to challenge Mrs. Gonzalez for HOA leadership, bringing with her a crew of wealthy investors with plans to revitalize the neighborhood, which everyone quickly realized meant forcing out families to build luxury condos. "It's just business," Veronica announced at her first community meeting, her crimson manicure tapping impatiently against her designer handbag. Sunshine Acres has untapped potential that certain elements have been suppressing. The way her gaze lingered on Emma, now happily chasing her 1-year-old daughter Lily around the community garden, made it clear this wasn't just business. This was personal. What Veronica didn't know was that I had spent the past year studying HOA law, giving free seminars to communities about homeowner rights, and building connections with state legislators interested in HOA reform. I thought it was just a side passion project born from Emma's experience. I never imagined those efforts would become crucial ammunition in a new battle, one that would make Margaret's reign look like a minor disagreement. Veronica Chambers was about to discover that the Wilson sisters don't back down when our community is threatened. And this time, I wouldn't need to recuse myself from delivering justice. Welcome back to my channel. If you thought the original story was wild, you won't believe what happened next. Veronica wasted no time implementing her vision for Sunshine Acres. Within 2 weeks of her return, residents received an elegantly printed community enhancement proposal outlining a 5-year plan to transform the neighborhood into what she called a premium living destination. Behind the corporate buzzwords and glossy renderings of water, features and meditation gardens was a simple reality. Families like my sister's weren't part of the plan. The board will be offering select homeowners generous buyout packages, Veronica announced at the next HOA meeting, her voice honeyed, but her eyes cold. For those properties requiring significant upgrades to meet our new community standards. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Mrs. Gonzalez, still technically HOA president until the upcoming election, tried to call for order, but Veronica smoothly continued as if she already held the position. Those choosing to remain will need to comply with our updated aesthetic guidelines, which will be strictly enforced for the benefit of maintaining property values. Her gaze swept meaningfully across the room, lingering on families with children. Emma, bouncing baby Lily on her knee, felt a chill despite the warm summer evening. Jason, her husband, squeezed her hand reassuringly. That night, Emma called me in a panic. "It's happening again," she said, her voice shaking. "But worse, Veronica has Margaret's vindictiveness plus actual money and connections." I tried to calm her down, explaining that the community had rights, that Veronica couldn't simply force people out of their homes. But even as I spoke, I was already pulling up property records, trying to verify Emma's claim that Veronica had been secretly purchasing homes. What I discovered was disturbing. Through various LLCs and investment groups, Veronica had indeed acquired ownership of nearly 30% of Sunshine Acres properties. Most were being rented back to original owners who believed they'd sold to different buyers. It was all technically legal, if ethically questionable. The holdings gave her significant voting power in HOA matters, especially if she could convince a few more residents to support her. The new aesthetic guidelines arrived the following week, a 47-page document of such detailed restrictions that virtually every home in Sunshine Acres was immediately in violation. The first round of citations appeared like clockwork, primarily targeting families with children and elderly residents on fixed incomes, those least likely to afford the mandated upgrades or fight back. Emma and Jason's violation notice cited unapproved recreational equipment visible from common areas, Lily's small sandbox, excessive personalization of facade, the welcome sign made by Emma's kindergarten class, and most absurdly, non-conforming landscaping intensity, Emma's butterfly garden. The required remediation would cost thousands. Mrs. Gonzalez received citations for her wheelchair ramp and Spanish-language welcome sign. The Patels, who had helped Emma after Margaret's assault, were cited for their traditional marigold garlands during Diwali. The pattern was clear. Veronica was targeting the community members who had stood against Margaret a year ago. "She's trying to break us apart," Mrs. Gonzalez said, when a group of concerned neighbors gathered in her living room. "If we fight amongst ourselves over these ridiculous violations, we won't unite against her bigger plan." The elderly woman's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained firm. "I may not have Veronica's money or connections, but I know what makes a real community." That's when I decided to get more directly involved. As a judge, I had to be careful about potential conflicts of interest, but nothing prevented me from helping residents understand their legal rights. I organized an informal community workshop at the local library, bringing in a real estate attorney friend who specialized in HOA disputes. The night of the workshop, we expected perhaps 20 people. Over 60 showed up, clutching violation. Notices and property documents, fear and determination mingling on their faces. My friend David, the attorney, laid out the situation plainly. "What Veronica is doing falls into a gray area of the law," he explained. "She's using technically legal methods to create pressure that forces sales. It's unfortunately common in neighborhoods seen as undervalued by developers." A collective murmur of anger rippled through the room. "But," David continued, raising a finger, "there are 3 things working in your favor. First, your HOA bylaws require a 75% supermajority for certain fundamental changes, including the aesthetic guidelines Veronica is trying to enforce. Second, Oregon state law provides stronger homeowner protections than many states. And third," he smiled, "you have each other." We developed a 3-part strategy that night. Challenge each violation through proper HOA channels, documenting everything meticulously. Investigate the paper trail of Veronica's property acquisitions for any improprieties. And most importantly, ensure Mrs. Gonzalez won the upcoming HOA election. Veronica's response was swift and ruthless. The following morning, residents who had attended the workshop received special notification of community concern letters, citing obscure bylaws about activities detrimental to neighborhood harmony. Those who had spoken up at the meeting found additional violations on their property, with escalating fines. Emma and Jason came home to find a property inspection notice taped to their door, informing them that Veronica herself would be conducting a full assessment of their home's compliance the following day. The implied threat was clear. I advised them to record everything and deny entry without proper notice as required by state law. When Veronica arrived the next morning, flanked by two men with clipboards, Jason politely but firmly stood his ground. At the front door, cell phone recording in hand. "Your inspection violates the 72-hour notice requirement in Oregon Revised Statute 94.6865, he stated, reading from the notes I had prepared. "We'll be happy to schedule a mutually convenient time, following proper procedures." Veronica's perfect smile didn't waver, though her eyes narrowed slightly. "I see someone's been coaching you," she said softly. "How nice to have a sister in the legal profession. Such a shame that professional ethics prevent judges from becoming personally involved in matters that might someday appear before them." The threat in her words was unmistakable. What Veronica didn't realize was that her intimidation tactics were having the opposite effect. Rather than fragmenting the community, her aggressive approach was uniting residents in opposition. The Patels began hosting weekly strategy meetings. Mrs. Gonzalez's grandson created a secure messaging group for neighbors to share information. Even previously uninvolved residents were growing concerned as property values fluctuated wildly. Amid rumors of upcoming development, 2 weeks before the HOA election, Veronica escalated dramatically. A certified letter arrived for each homeowner who hadn't yet received a violation, offering a one-time courtesy buyout at 15% above current market value, with the ominous note that property values were expected to decline significantly for non-compliant homes once the new guidelines were fully implemented. That same day, construction equipment appeared on 3 recently vacated properties, despite no building permits being publicly filed. When Mrs. Gonzalez attempted to verify the permits with the county office, she was told the information was temporarily unavailable due to a system upgrade. Then came Veronica's masterstroke. At a special emergency meeting of the current HOA board, conveniently scheduled when several opposing members couldn't attend, she presented documentation claiming that Emma and Jason's mortgage lender had raised concerns about their property maintenance. The board, stacked with Veronica's allies, voted to place a lien on their home pending resolution of their violations, effectively preventing them from selling or refinancing. "It's just procedure," Veronica explained with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure once they bring their property into compliance, everything can be resolved." The estimated cost of the required changes, $42,000. When Emma called me that night, sobbing, I knew we had reached a turning point. This wasn't just about community aesthetics or even property values anymore. Veronica was systematically dismantling people's sense of security in their own homes, wielding fear as effectively as Margaret had wielded her clipboard. "It's time to stop playing defense," I told Emma, a plan already forming in my mind. "Veronica thinks she's the only one who knows how to use the system. She's about to learn otherwise." The breaking point came exactly 9 days before the HOA election. Emma had been at the neighborhood playground with Lily when she noticed 2 men in business suits photographing the children, making notes on tablets. When she approached them, they claimed to be assessing community amenities for insurance purposes, and quickly departed in a luxury SUV with tinted windows. Later that afternoon, an email went out to all Sunshine Acres residents from Veronica's Community Enhancement Committee announcing that the playground would be temporarily closed for safety evaluations, effective immediately. By evening, the swings had been removed and yellow caution tape surrounded the entire area. A printed notice indicated the closure would last indefinitely pending professional assessment. The impact was immediate and devastating. Families with young children suddenly had nowhere for their kids to play safely. The community garden adjacent to the playground, Emma's pride and joy where she taught neighborhood children about butterflies and bees, was also declared off-limits due to potential contamination concerns that were never specified. That night, the community gathered at the Patel's house, their backyard becoming the new de facto meeting space. The mood was somber, with many residents openly discussing selling their homes and moving elsewhere. Even Mrs. Gonzalez seemed defeated. "Perhaps we should be realistic," she said quietly. "Veronica has resources we cannot match. Maybe taking her buyout offers is the wisest choice for our families." I could see the community's spirit breaking before my eyes. All the progress made since Margaret's departure, the sense of belonging, the shared responsibility, the genuine care for one another, was crumbling under Veronica's systematic pressure. That's when Jason, usually the quieter half of his marriage to my sister, stood up. "My daughter deserves to grow up in a community that values families," he said, his voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. "Lily deserves to play in the garden her mother created. Our homes are not just investments. They're where we live our lives." He looked around the room. "I refuse to be bullied out of my home. Again, not by Margaret, not by Veronica, not by anyone." A silence fell over the gathering. Then Mrs. Gonzalez slowly rose to her feet, her arthritis making the movement painful but her dignity intact. "Jason is right," she declared. "We have been reacting to Veronica's moves instead of making our own. This must change." That night, everything shifted. What had been a defensive struggle to maintain the status quo transformed into something more determined, more strategic. If Veronica was playing chess, thinking several moves ahead, we needed to change the game entirely. I knew I was walking a fine ethical line as a judge, but as Emma's sister and a former resident of the community, I couldn't stand by while families were systematically harassed. After careful consideration, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Sofia Rivera, an investigative journalist who had recently published a series on predatory development practices in Oregon communities. The second was to State Senator James Chen, who had been working on legislation to strengthen HOA regulations after hearing my testimony about Emma's experience with Margaret. "I can't promise anything will come of this," I told the gathered neighbors. "And I want to be clear that my official capacity as a judge prevents me from directly intervening in civil matters that might come before the court. But as a private citizen with knowledge of the law, I can tell you that what Veronica is doing exists in legally questionable territory." What I didn't tell them was that I had spent the past 3 months quietly documenting every potential violation of HOA regulations, property law, and state statutes that Veronica's actions suggested, or that Senator Chen's legislative aide had been collecting similar reports from other communities targeted by the same investment group, or that journalist Sofia Rivera had already uncovered connections between Veronica's shell companies and 3 county officials now under ethics investigations. As the meeting dispersed, a new tension filled the air, not the crushing weight of defeat, but the electric anticipation of confrontation. Veronica believed she held all the power, that her money and connections made her untouchable. She was about to discover how wrong she was. The morning after our strategy meeting, Sunshine Acres residents woke to find their email inboxes and social media feeds buzzing with the first installment of Sofia Rivera's investigative series. Community Capture: How Investor Groups Target and Dismantle Neighborhoods for Profit. The feature opened with a striking aerial photo of Sunshine Acres. Yellow caution tape visible around the playground, contrasted with renderings from Veronica's proposed luxury development. The article meticulously detailed how Veronica's investment group, Chambers Elite Properties, had systematically targeted 6 other communities across 3 states, using nearly identical tactics. Acquire properties through shell companies, install allies in HOA leadership, implement impossible compliance standards, then redevelop once enough homeowners had been forced out. Most damning were the internal emails Sofia had somehow obtained, showing Veronica's explicit strategy for Sunshine Acres. Target families first, maintenance costs and resistance highest, financial flexibility lowest. Elderly next, Fixed incomes make compliance upgrades impossible. Save professionals for last buyout round when values drop after family exodus. Veronica's response was immediate and furious. An emergency community alert went out to all residents, claiming the article contained malicious falsehoods and potential defamation that threatened property values. She announced an emergency HOA meeting that evening to address this attack on our community's reputation. What she didn't expect was for the meeting to be standing room only, with not just residents but also 3 local TV news crews, Senator Chen himself, and representatives from the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. When Veronica attempted to limit attendance to homeowners only, Mrs. Gonzalez quietly produced the HOA bylaws section, stating all meetings must be open if more than 3 board members were present. When Veronica tried to restrict comments to 3 minutes per person, Jason presented the rarely invoked community concern provision, allowing extended discussion for issues affecting more than 30% of residents. Ms. Chambers, Senator Chen said when he finally took the microphone, "My office has received concerning reports about potentially discriminatory housing practices in this community. I'm particularly troubled by evidence suggesting targeted enforcement against families with children, which would violate both state and federal fair housing laws." Veronica maintained her composure, though the slight tremor in her perfectly manicured hands betrayed her agitation. "Senator, with all due respect, this is a private community matter. Our compliance standards apply equally to all residents. Is that why 87% of violation notices have gone to homes with children or elderly residents?" called out Mrs. Patel, waving a stack of papers. "My husband and I have been collecting copies of all citations issued in the past 3 months. The pattern is quite statistically significant." The retired statistician adjusted her glasses. "The probability of this distribution occurring randomly is approximately 0.0002%. For the first time, Veronica appeared genuinely flustered. "These allegations are completely unfounded. The board has followed all proper procedures." "About that board," interrupted a man I didn't recognize, who introduced himself as a forensic accountant with the State Attorney General's office. "We've noticed some irregularities in how certain properties were acquired and voting rights assigned. For instance, 3 of the properties you claim to control appear to have deed registration, issues that would invalidate their voting eligibility under both HOA bylaws and state regulations." The meeting devolved from there, with Veronica attempting to adjourn repeatedly only to be overruled by procedural motions from increasingly emboldened residents. By the meeting's end, 3 critical developments had occurred. A temporary injunction was issued freezing all fines and compliance actions pending investigation. An emergency motion passed requiring all HOA board votes to be conducted by secret ballot with independent verification. And the playground closure was reversed effective immediately. Veronica stormed out, phone already at her ear, but the damage to her authority was done. For the first time, residents saw her not as an invincible force, but as someone operating within constraints. Constraints they now understood how to use. The following morning, Veronica's strategic retreat began. A formal letter from Chambers, Elite Properties Management, announced they were reassessing community enhancement priorities in light of resident feedback. All outstanding violations were temporarily suspended pending review, and the lien against Emma and Jason's house was mysteriously withdrawn without explanation. But we knew better than to celebrate prematurely. This was tactical repositioning, not surrender. Veronica was too invested, financially and personally, to simply walk away. Her countermove came 3 days later, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than continuing to fight the united community, she offered an olive branch, a modified development plan that would preserve most existing homes while still adding luxury amenities. The playground would be expanded, not removed. The community garden would receive professional landscaping support, and most enticingly, each current homeowner would receive a community legacy discount on any homeowner association fees for the next decade. "We may have gotten off on the wrong foot," Veronica announced at a hastily called community gathering, her voice warm with practiced sincerity. "My passion for creating exceptional living environments sometimes overshadows my appreciation for existing community bonds. I'm proposing a compromise that benefits everyone." The offer was tempting, especially to residents weary of conflict. Even Mrs. Gonzalez seemed willing to consider this apparent concession. "Perhaps we have misjudged her intentions," she suggested cautiously at our next strategy meeting. "This new proposal addresses many of our concerns." Only Emma remained adamantly suspicious. "Read the fine print," she insisted, poring over the glossy proposal booklet. "The legacy discount only applies if we accept a modified CC&R agreement that gives the board executive authority over future development decisions without community votes." She was right. Buried in the legal language was a fundamental restructuring of how Sunshine Acres would be governed, essentially giving Veronica and her allies complete control once residents signed away their voting rights on development matters. It was a masterful deception, appeared to concede the battle while quietly winning the war. The HOA election was now just 3 days away, and the community was fracturing again. Some residents, exhausted by constant conflict, were willing to accept Veronica's compromise. Others, led by Emma and the Patels, recognized the poison pill hidden within the attractive packaging. That's when we received an unexpected ally from Veronica's past. A forwarded email arrived in my inbox from an anonymous address, containing a single attachment. Veronica's divorce filing from 7 years earlier. Normally, I would consider such personal information irrelevant, but a single name in the document caught my attention. Margaret Wilson was listed as a character witness. Further digging by Sophia revealed what we had somehow missed. Veronica and Margaret weren't just former HOA colleagues, they were cousins by marriage. Margaret's vindictive campaign against Emma hadn't been random HOA tyranny. It had been the opening move in a long-game strategy to destabilize the community. When that backfired spectacularly with Margaret's assault charge, Veronica had retreated temporarily, regrouped with more resources, and returned to finish what they had started. The night before the HOA election, we held our final community meeting in the newly reopened playground. As twilight settled over Sunshine Acres, families gathered on picnic blankets and folding chairs. Children, including little Lily, played on swings that just days earlier had been removed. The sense of reclaimed space was palpable. I had asked Emma to speak, knowing her personal story would carry more weight than legal arguments or financial analysis. My usually gentle sister stood before her neighbors, Lily balanced on her hip, and spoke with quiet intensity. "A year ago, I was physically assaulted in my own garden for having wind chimes that Margaret Wilson didn't approve of. I was 8 months pregnant, and both my daughter's life and mine were put at risk because someone decided their authority over our community was more important than our humanity." She paused, looking around at the gathered faces. Now Margaret's cousin wants us to believe she has our best interests at heart, even as she systematically worked to divide us, intimidate us, and ultimately remove us from our homes. She's offering us a beautifully wrapped package with a simple request: just sign away your rights to have any meaningful say in the future of your own community. Emma shifted Lily to her other hip. "My daughter took her first steps in the garden Margaret tried to make me remove. She said her first word on the porch where we still hang the wind chimes that caused such outrage. This isn't just property to us, it's where our lives happen. And I believe each of us deserves to determine how and where we live those lives, not have it dictated by someone who sees our homes as nothing but investment opportunities." As Emma finished speaking, an unexpected figure moved forward from the edge of the gathering. Caroline Turner, Veronica's executive assistant and right hand in all HOA matters. The crowd tensed, but Caroline's body language wasn't confrontational. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," she said, her voice barely audible, "but I can't continue participating in what's happening here." From her designer handbag, she withdrew a USB drive. "This contains the actual financial projections and investor communications for Sunshine Acres, not the glossy compromise being presented, but the real plan that hasn't changed despite all this pushback." She handed the drive to Mrs. Gonzalez. "You'll find that the compromise is designed to fail in specific ways that trigger developer clauses. Within 18 months, Chambers Elite would still have legal authority to proceed with complete redevelopment, and the litigation costs for homeowners to fight it would be prohibitive." Caroline looked around nervously. "I'm not doing this out of nobility. Veronica has used similar tactics in other communities, and I've recently learned the FBI is investigating potential wire fraud and racketeering charges related to those developments. I have no interest in being collateral damage in that investigation." With that bombshell delivered, she quickly departed, leaving the community in stunned silence. Senator Chen, who had remained at the periphery of these community discussions to maintain political neutrality, now stepped forward. "I came here tonight to announce that tomorrow, regardless of your HOA election outcome, I will be introducing emergency legislation freezing all developer-initiated HOA takeovers across the state pending a complete review of regulations and enforcement. What's happening in Sunshine Acres is unfortunately not unique, but it can be where we finally say, enough." The HOA election the next morning had the highest turnout in Sunshine Acres history. Mrs. Gonzalez was re-elected president by an overwhelming margin, with Jason elected as vice president. Veronica received exactly 3 votes, presumably her own, and those of the 2 remaining allies who hadn't yet distanced themselves from her increasingly toxic reputation. But the true climax came that afternoon, when Veronica arrived at the community center to contest the results, only to be met by 2 FBI agents and a representative from the state attorney general's office. Caroline's USB drive had contained more than just Sunshine Acres documents. It included evidence of systematic fraud across multiple developments, with explicit strategies for manipulating property values, deceiving homeowners, and bribing local officials. As Veronica was escorted to a waiting vehicle, her expression of stunned disbelief reminded me powerfully of Margaret's face in my courtroom a year earlier. Both women had operated for so long with impunity that they couldn't process the concept of accountability when it finally arrived. Emma stood watching from our mother's old porch swing, which she'd installed in her front yard against HOA regulations, now permanently amended. Lily played with her wooden blocks on a colorful blanket nearby, blissfully unaware of how close she had come to losing this home, this community, this sense of belonging. "Do you think it's really over?" Emma asked me quietly as the FBI vehicle disappeared around the corner. I put my arm around my sister's shoulders. "This battle is, but communities like ours will always be valuable targets. The difference now is we know how to fight back." 1 year to the day after Margaret Wilson assaulted my pregnant sister over wind chimes, I stood in the middle of Sunshine Acres' newly expanded community garden, watching children chase butterflies through Emma's carefully cultivated pollinator section. The transformation of our neighborhood wasn't just physical, though the playground improvements, walking trails, and community gathering spaces were certainly welcome additions. The true change was in how residents now viewed themselves, not as passive homeowners subject to arbitrary rules, but as active stakeholders in a shared community. Senator Chen's emergency legislation had indeed passed, creating a statewide moratorium on developer-initiated HOA takeovers while a comprehensive review of regulations was conducted. Sunshine Acres became something of a case study, with community representatives, including Emma and Mrs. Gonzalez, testifying before legislative committees about their experiences. Veronica Chambers and 3 of her business associates now faced federal charges related to wire fraud, racketeering, and housing discrimination. The evidence provided by Caroline proved devastating, revealing a pattern of predatory practices across multiple states. Margaret Wilson, already on probation for her assault on Emma, found herself named as a co-conspirator in the earliest phases of the Sunshine Acres scheme. As for our community, the property holdings Veronica had accumulated through various shell companies were placed in receivership pending resolution of the federal case. Rather than allowing them to be sold to the highest bidder, residents formed the Sunshine Acres Community Land Trust, pooling resources to purchase several properties and convert them to permanently affordable housing, ensuring economic diversity would remain part of the neighborhood's future. Emma now serves as the Community Garden Coordinator, hosting weekly workshops where children learn about ecology and sustainable gardening. Jason leads the newly formed Homeowners Advocacy Committee, providing resources and support to other communities facing similar pressures. And Mrs. Gonzalez, in her second term as HOA president, has become something of a local celebrity, frequently consulted by other neighborhood associations looking to reform their governance models. The wind chimes that once triggered such absurd conflict now hang from porches throughout Sunshine Acres, a gentle, tinkling symbol of individual expression within community harmony. They remind us of how quickly authority can become tyranny without compassion and fairness to balance it. As a judge, I've presided over countless disputes between neighbors, landlords and tenants, businesses and customers. But my sister's experience has forever changed how I view these cases, looking beyond the legal technicalities to see the human impact of power imbalances and always questioning who benefits from rigid enforcement of rules. Sometimes justice arrives in unexpected ways. Sometimes it takes a community standing together to achieve what no individual could manage alone. And sometimes the sweetest victories aren't won in courtrooms, but in playgrounds and gardens where children like Lily can grow up, knowing their home is truly theirs. The information in this video is for informational and entertainment purposes only. HOA rules and laws vary by state and community.